trust is something that doesn't come one day. Like, it's not something that's short term. I think it's a building of, it's kind of this accumulation of all the different tiny things that you've done with that stakeholder builds that trust at the end of the day. So it could be, so I don't think that, it has to be like this big grand gesture, but just everyday tiny things, checking in with your stakeholder, or even trying to understand how they prefer to communicate. Like, I think tiny things like that can build up over time.
Hello and welcome to the Design Explorers, a podcast by the Agora design team. Agora.com is the global digital travel platform where you can book hotels, vacation rentals, flights, and airport transfer. In this podcast, we will be sharing the awesome work of our design team, discuss interesting trends in relation to design and travel, and talk about product design in general. My name is Nachum Yamin and I will be your host for the show. Our guest today is Yuiko, a senior product designer at our team who works on our customer experience group internal tools, where she gets to manage different stakeholders and work with different parts of our business. Yuiko is here today to share with us how she managed and worked with so many stakeholders and her interesting and quite unique background before transitioning into design. But before we talk about all that, recently we celebrated here Songkran, which is the Thai New Year, and it is also a time for many of us to take vacation and travel. During her vacation, Yuiko had a very interesting experience how she got to use the product that she worked on as a designer, but as a customer. And she wanted to share that with us and some of the insights she got from that experience.
During Songkran, I had gone to France and Portugal. And on my last day in Lisbon, I decided to check into my flight online. I thought, I need to check in. So I checked into my flight. And when I did, I realized that I would land in Bangkok on the 17th of April. And I remember distinctly that I did not book a hotel for the 17th. I thought that I booked it for the 16th, because when I had originally booked my airplane, the confirmation said departure April 16th and then Bangkok +1. And I didn't really think too much of the +1 time difference. And it's been such a long time since I had last traveled too that I didn't really think much of it. And then in Thailand, you have to submit the Thailand pass, which is the entry document to get back into the country. So I had booked my hotel for the 16th, and then I have the Thailand pass. But when I checked in, I realized that Thailand pass probably does not work because it's for the 16th instead of the 17th. So I went into our chatbot, which I designed, or I helped design. And I'm going through, I'm like walking down the streets of, so let me paint you a picture. So it's like 10 p.m. at night. Me and my friend are walking down the streets of Lisbon. I just check into my flight and I realize I've made a mistake. And then I go into our Agoda chatbot and start to, it's weird. I went straight to try to contact an agent, and I'm waiting in the live chat, waiting for an agent because I don't have international roaming and I felt like email might take a while. So I just decided to do the live chat. But I'm walking, so my phone will keep on turning off. And I think maybe that's why, or I don't know if I got disconnected or not. So I was just waiting without an agent coming. And then I would try multiple times trying to see if I could get an agent, whereas I should probably just stay on the line and wait. So I got connected to two agents, actually. The first one told me that I can't change the hotel date and I need to cancel. So, which was great because now I knew what I needed to do. So I canceled, I rebooked, and then I went to live chat again. And then the agent told me that they'll contact the property to see if I could get a refund for my previous, the one that I originally booked. And she was able to get it within 5 minutes or so. She was able to get it for me. So the whole journey was maybe an hour from the moment I realized I messed up to the moment where everything became resolved. But I thought it was really interesting because out of the hour, maybe I was talking to the agent for about 15 minutes. So the human contact part is really is not as much, and all the other parts that are offline is a lot more. And it made me realize I kind of wrote like a diary study of it afterwards in the on the plane because I wanted to make sure I remember this feeling when I do go back to like improve the product again. But I just thought it was just so ironic how like there's parts of the chat bot that I didn't really think about it too much when I was designing because I was never really immersed in the experience. And when I was immersed in the experience, I was like, oh my goodness, this has to go, or like, we can't be doing this, or we can't be doing that. So I think it was a good vacation, but also a good learning experience that brought me back some good thoughts as I came back into work. But yeah, I didn't think I would have to. I don't know. It's been a long time since I had traveled, so I think um, it was a good way to kind of understand the customer a little bit more too in the real world.
That's a very interesting story. I think my Songkran was just a little bit more boring than that. It wasn't as eventful, so I think there's a lot to learn. And I think being in CEG, customer experience group, you have I guess being in that position of experiencing your own product is, as you said, insightful. Even though you try to always be in the shoes of the users, right? So could you kind of walk through the audience, like your experience in CEG and maybe what you do there?
Yeah, so CEG stands for Customer Experience Group, and at Agoda, that's basically kind of our customer service, customer support team. So the purpose of our Customer Experience Group is to provide help for any of the issues our customers or our suppliers or our partners face when they use Agoda. So what that means in terms of product is that there's actually a bigger ecosystem of different products that create customer experience group. So when I was in Lisbon on the chatbot, that was like a customer trying to contact Agoda. That is a touch point. Customers can go into our help center page. They can also give us a call. So there's a variety of touch points that customers have when they try to make changes with their booking. But on the flip side, there's also the agents. So there's agents that are on the front lines that are taking customer calls or even hotel calls to try to solve these people's cases. And they also use different tools in order to handle these cases. And there's also another suite of tools that are in the backstage of these agents that create the workflows for these agents, because we do have many agents, but we have even more customers. And to be able to provide a consistent experience to all of our customers, agents need more guidance, and we have workflows set in place for that. So CEG, in terms of product, there's a lot of different tools and products that create this whole experience and make it all possible. That also comes with a lot of different people too. So there's people like us, like designers, developers, and product that are more on the product side, but there's also a bigger business unit that's kind of in its own little organization, where there's people in technology and operations. We also have our own separate people team to train and hire our agents. So there's a bigger, I think, business component to the customer experience group. And as a designer, it's really interesting because not only do you create products, but you create products for different types of users, as well as collaborating with a lot of different stakeholders as well.
Mm-hmm. And today's episode is about stakeholder management, right? And I think last we talked, your background is actually not in design, right? You initially started your career somewhere else. Could you talk a little bit about that and maybe connect it to how you came to be a CEG designer and how it has helped you in your current position?
Yeah, so I never thought I would be a designer. I'm also kind of surprised that I'm here now because my background is just seems so remotely different. But I started out in sales, where I was doing B2B sales, selling broadcast fiber in Japan. And that's kind of how I started my career. And in sales, I learned a lot of things, but we had, since it's B2B, our clients are longer term enterprise clients. So maintaining good relationships was a key to getting those deals and making our product successful. So that was kind of a lot of what I learned in sales. And from there, I progressed more into project management and managing the projects to execution from when we close the bid with our clients. And from there, it kind of evolved into more of a strategy role. And as I progressed through my career, I learned more about the business side, the strategy side, but then I became more interested in being more on the product side and being able to actually execute some of the work. So I pivoted into design, and I think it's a great intersection between business and the customer and the user. And I think that the skills I had subconsciously kind of acquired through all of this, I ended up being a strength at the end, especially as a CAG designer, because there are obviously visual elements too, but it is also heavily UX and domain driven. And there are, I think I know maybe 1% of what it is to know about CEG. It's a very complicated area, but there's a lot of different people who are experts of their area. And so as a CEG designer, similarly to sales, I am talking to different types of people of different types of backgrounds every day and learning from them, and also trying to figure out ways we can better collaborate with them, because at the end of the day, we are trying to make this cohesive ecosystem of different types of suites of products for our different users. So that way, at the end of the day, the customer is able to get fast and efficient service. So I think that while at the moment, in like those different moments in my career, I didn't realize how they would be beneficial to me, I think looking back, I realized that some of those dots kind of connect, where in sales, I think there's a lot of transferable skills like facilitation, presentation, time management, and stakeholder management. And I think the stakeholder management part is something that I'm really glad that I learned, because it's something that I feel like is something that I do every day today, and is something that has really given me a lot of opportunities to collaborate with our broader team. So yeah, who would have thought we would come from sales to here, but here we are.
Maybe you can give us some examples of some of these skills that you picked up with your experience and what you learned from sales and project management, how they come into play in design, and what exactly these skills.
I think that in sales, I learned a lot about empathy and understanding the client, which is something that I use today. I think in our design process itself, we start from research and we start from discovery, understanding what our users need, what are the constraints, what are the limitations, what are these people's goals. And I think that sales really kind of taught me that, because I mean, when I first started out in sales, I thought that I would be really, really bad at it, and I was also really scared because I don't particularly enjoy talking to a bunch of different people as much as I'm sure like a lot of extroverts do. But I think one thing that I learned from sales, looking at all these different types of people, my managers, my colleagues who I would shadow and visit clients with, they were really good at understanding. And it also came from a lot of listening and actively listening to the client, understanding on a business level of what kinds of things they needed for that particular project, but also they were able to connect on a human level too, where I feel like the colleagues and managers I worked with were really good at trying to, look up current events of the company the client's at to bring up some conversation, or they would ask questions about that person's interests, and they would remember all of that information. So the next time they do come and meet the client again, they're able to have these talking points that they could talk about and connect with the client more. So I think that taught me that it's not really a lot about talking in general, but it's a lot about listening and understanding where your stakeholders are coming from, which I think I still use today. In terms of project management, I think because in CAG, a lot of our projects are very big, as in designers would own one product as opposed to, say, like a feature or a subset of a feature. And I think that our scope is rather big, that when it does come to creating something bigger, it is really important to have kind of the priorities set too, which I think is something that I learned in project management, where I mean, I think in an ideal world we want to do everything, but it's really hard to be able to do everything. So we need to set priorities, and I think those priorities also come from the different stakeholders too, of what each stakeholder, what are their individual goals, also what is the common goal that we want to achieve with the product, and kind of laying out those priorities in that way. That's something I learned from project management, but I think for both of them, I think the relationships you cultivate with your stakeholders will make a huge difference in how you are able to collaborate. And I think at the end of the day, it will show in the projects that you create and how you innovate. That at the end of the day, I feel like we're all humans, and design is very human centric. That also the way we collaborate, I think, also has to be in like a similar way, where we understand each of the stakeholders' own challenges and the differences too. I think they are our stakeholders because they are different and they bring something different to the table and they have their own expertise. So acknowledging and respecting that, and also trying to understand their domain a little bit more, to build trust over time and cultivate those relationships, was something that I learned and I still use today.
Moving from a different industry, coming into travel, have you felt any differences in stakeholder management and how you might, I guess, go about your way managing stakeholders' expectations at Agoda compared to your previous experiences?
So previously I was at a larger corporation doing sales, and then I've also worked as a designer in an agency environment, and I feel like those are very different environments, where sales, it's really dependent on the client. Agency, it's a little bit more short-term projects and client-specific. I think Agoda is my first in-house product company, and I think that from my experience at Agoda, I think it's a little bit more balanced, where I feel like, of course, as designers and as a product organization, we aim to delight our customers, our users, and make sure that what we're creating is actually useful. But at the same time, I think there's a balance with the business too, where without a business, we don't have a product to create, but without users, we don't have a product to make either. So I think that there needs to be a good balance between the two. So I think that the way we manage stakeholders in any of the environments, I think at its core is not so different, where it does come from understanding and empathizing with the stakeholder, trying to understand where they're coming from. I think is something that is same for any environment. I think because at Agoda we are an in-house product org, I think one thing that might be different is that we can bring these stakeholders really early on in the design journey. Like, instead of maybe at an agency you need to show something more polished, but Agoda, I feel like I create draft designs and send them out and see what happens all the time, and I think it's great because it allows us to collaborate earlier on, and kind of build something together, as opposed to kind of having something more siloed where design will design and then hand it over. I think that there's a little bit more collaboration, but I think that also is why it makes things more complex too. For CEG, there are a lot of different people that I would share designs with. It's not just the product folks, but it will also be people that are in operations who understand kind of what the agent workflows are, or we even show it to the agents and see what they say. And I think there's a lot more people that we share with, which can make it more complex because you are getting different types of feedback. But I think at the end, you can create a better product because you have so many types of voices and different perspectives that are incorporated in anything that you ship.
So stakeholder management at the end of the day is working with people. Like you mentioned, you have different backgrounds, different perspective. And because of that, sometimes you could have maybe conflicts or challenges working with other people. How do you manage that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we will always have conflict. I don't think that it because we have different backgrounds and different expertise and different agendas at times. I think it's completely normal that we do have conflict, and I think how we approach that conflict is kind of the key part, because we can't avoid conflict. And I think it's good to have conflict because that also means that we're in a space where people feel open to say their opinion too. I think though that while individually we might have different goals and different challenges and different limitations, at the end of the day, the common goal that links us all should be there. And I think that when there is this common goal, then it kind of all links us together. So it would help to understand what the common goal is and what the individual goal is. To give an example, in CEG design, we are trying to create a longer term research plan, and we wanted to figure out what types of research and what types of information of the user we currently know, and then what are the things that we don't know that we need to know. And what we did was we did this workshop, but we brought in people of all different backgrounds. So we brought in developers, product managers, we brought in people from operations, we brought in data scientists, different types of people. And when we did the exercise, is true, like a lot of the stuff that we see in those individual stickies are very different. But when we went back and synthesized, we started to see that there are common themes and common goals that link those stickies together. And so I think that when you do have conflict, it might be helpful to see why that conflict is happening, where that person is coming from, and what that person's individual goal is. And then also kind of reflect on yourself too, of what you are trying to achieve and why you think maybe this is a conflict. And then if you could map it back to the common goal, what you provide as a solution can be something that not only incorporates what you would like, but also what the stakeholder might wish for too. And if you can map it to the common goal, I think it not only becomes more of a win-win situation, but I think it also makes the stakeholder feel understood and heard. And I think those are things that can build trust over time. Like even when as designers, when we're presenting a design, instead of saying, hey, I think ABCD solution would be great, and if it's just coming from you and just coming from what users have said, that's great. But I think it elevates it one step further when you can say something like, hey, I understand that this stakeholder, we have this issue, and this stakeholder, we have this issue, and we have these types of limitations. But in this environment, I think that design ABCD would be a good way to not only account for some of that limitation, but also provide a better experience for the user. And I think if you can frame it in that way, it would also make the stakeholders feel like they're not being dismissed and they're being considered. And also the solution you bring is a lot more higher quality and showing a little bit more holistically your knowledge of the entire domain.
It's actually catching me by surprise in terms of like the impacts that it could have, right? I think the end result is to come up with a solution that tries to satisfy the stakeholder as much as possible. Hopefully that's a win-win, but a lot of times there are trade-offs that needs to be made. And when there are those trade-offs that needs to be made, as you said, involving the stakeholders early on, and kind of making sure that they're not surprised and their opinions or objectives or voices are heard, make sure that they have somewhat investment and they're likely to accept any proposal or solutions that you propose on the table. So I think that's an interesting way to kind of see our job as a designer and how we could make impact or lead change within the organization, right? I think you have a pretty unique background as a designer, and I think if you hadn't gone through all the previous experiences in sales and project management, what kind of advice would you give to a designer that doesn't have all these similar backgrounds as yours?
Yeah, I think that I mean, honestly, I was just lucky to be kind of going through that in my career. But I think that what I learned are things that we could do every day as designers, even without a sales background or any kind of background per se. Because I think at its core, it's if we can be empathetic, I think that enables us to be more proactive. And if we could be more proactive, I think that will build trust over time. And that I feel like is kind of the foundation of building good relationships with our stakeholders. I feel like I'm sounding like a broken record, but I feel like when we empathize, we understand, put ourselves into the other person's shoe. That person feels like they are being heard. When someone has interest in what you do, I think that's also a great feeling as well, where you can kind of engage with that person at that level. But when you do understand a little bit more, then you are able to be more proactive. So when you do know something more about the stakeholder, maybe you will consider that when you do something. So if you are creating a design, or if you want to drive a new initiative, when you're trying to figure out how to position, like say for example, if we are trying to create a new initiative and we want to see how we could get buy-in from all these stakeholders, it is great to understand those different stakeholders and see what they might be considering or thinking, and proactively put into your strategy things that they might probably already say. So that way, when you're presenting and trying to pitch the strategy, you're already considering them, and they won't be asking you the questions that you probably think that they'll ask you anyway. And I think that will kind of accelerate the process too. And I think over time, that will also build a lot of trust. People will start trusting you more because they feel like they might think that you understand them more too, which I think would be great, because I think trust is something that doesn't come one day. Like, it's not something that's short term. I think it's a building of, it's kind of this accumulation of all the different tiny things that you've done with that stakeholder builds that trust at the end of the day. So it could be, so I don't think that, it has to be like this big grand gesture, but just everyday tiny things, checking in with your stakeholder, or even trying to understand how they prefer to communicate. Like, I think tiny things like that can build up over time. So you don't need to be in sales.
In theory, it makes a lot of sense as an audience listening to all these things. As everyone, I think all designers have to constantly remind themselves to be proactive and constantly manage the relationship with stakeholders, right? But I think the other thing about, keeping people involved early on, I think when there are stakeholders that may not necessarily be interested or have influence, but is very far reaching from your position, like, although I guess there's the advice that you want to keep them in the loop as early as possible, but there's always new projects. Projects get defunded or postponed and deprioritized. Like, how early is early enough is the question, right? Like,
I think there's two parts to that question where before even like when to bring in stakeholders, I think there's also a component of who to bring in at what level of involvement. So, for example, there's like a project management concept called the RACI model, which stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed, which are different degrees of how involved a stakeholder should be. And it's basically a matrix where you would write down all the stakeholders and then see how much involvement they would need. So, for example, if it's someone super, super high up that maybe might be more of like the vision, might be more of a visionary type of person. And then maybe if you have someone that is more in the front line, for example, like agents maybe might be more on the front line who understand kind of those operations. I think that those two people would have very different types of involvement, where maybe the agent will have better understanding of the context, whereas maybe the other person might have more of a higher level understanding. However, maybe they are able to drive the strategy better. So depending on what you need, I think you bring in different people. But when you do start thinking about like doing something, I think it's good to bring them in early. So for example, even when we do very ambiguous designs of let's create this bigger product and we don't really know where to start. I think the starting point is trying to figure out, maybe as a designer, like what you need to do. And then in those prospective stages, who you need to bring in. And when you are in that particular stage, I would bring them in. I think personally, I like to bring people in as early as possible. Maybe even just from gathering the requirements. What I would do is we would have, so maybe CUG functions a little bit differently, but we have people that are really knowledgeable about the domain that we bring in, and they'll kind of tell us a little bit more of the requirements that we need. But we also don't know 100% of what those requirements are when things are really ambiguous. So as a designer, I might create a first pass of a design and then have a bunch of questions, and then we will do another session and we will bring all these people back again, plus people that we think might be able to help us a little bit more. So that way we're creating a product together instead of it being like, hey, I've done this, let me show you, and then getting an approval. So I think that maybe making it, the benefit of bringing in someone early is that they will be able to work with you instead of it being kind of more of this transactional relationship. However, I don't think that each stakeholder needs to be brought in that early in that depth. So depending on the stakeholder, I think you need to be able to position it a little bit differently. So for example, if you've created this whole, like maybe this I don't know, like this vision of a product and you have kind of figured out some of the requirements, maybe then you bring in someone that is a little bit higher up to pitch that vision and see what they might think about it. And maybe it's not the finalized vision, but maybe a first version of it. And from there, you can kind of get that feedback to see more on a holistic level what someone of that position might think. So I think if you understand kind of what strengths those stakeholders have, you'll be able to see like when to bring them in.
If I understood your answer correctly, I think it's not necessarily like as early as possible or like on the first day where your project has kicked off, but rather consulting your stakeholders depending on what their position or relationship to the projects are, consulting them early enough in order where the project is still open to feedback and is able to change. Right? If you present to someone as a final solution and there's no wiggle room for change, I think that's when the people are surprised and has some hesitation to accepting certain solutions. Whereas if you go to them and said like, hey, we've been working on this for X amount of days, weeks, or months, but if you ask them and say like, hey, we're here for feedback and there's these things that we need your feedback on and we're willing to change the solution for. I think that's where that is the definition of early for that stakeholder, right? So I think that's where the caveat is for how early is too early or early enough. So does that kind of reframe fit?
It's always easier to have someone work with you as opposed to trying to convince someone when it's already too fixed and too late. Because and also I think in our world of product, we do want to fail fast and we do want to pivot quickly. And I think to be able to do that, we need to bring in the right people at the right time. So that way we can continue to do that.
I've realized that you can present the same solution to the same people, but depending on what happened prior or what you shared earlier, like the room will be different, the feedback that you get will be different, right? The approval process will be different, right? And so I think it's not really about how good your idea is. It's about the framing of that idea, the people that you involved around those ideas and how that idea came about is as important, or if not more important than what the final solution that you come up with, right? So yeah, that's my takeaway.
I feel like that's so true. And I feel like it's interesting because as designers, we could be presented the same prompt, but we will maybe have different outcomes. But also at the same time, we could show the same outcome and then have very different feedback based on if you've briefed someone before or how well they know about what you're doing. I feel like it changes kind of the feedback there too, that at the end of the day, it's all people, but I feel like it's just managing those relationships. It's like human psychology, kind of all in one in design.
Traditionally, in the practice of design and UX, there's a lot of emphasis that goes on craft, on ideas, being creative, and there's not much to be learned about how to handle the stakeholder, how to work with the people that we work with. We learn to be empathetic with our users and the people that use the product, and not so much goes into that. So, it's great that we had you in the show today, and we want to thank you for coming and sharing your experience on that.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I appreciate being able to be provided the place to share.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you are listening, and share it with your friends and colleagues. Don't forget to subscribe to our show to get notified when we are releasing a new episode. And if you want to learn more about the work of the design team at Agoda, visit agoda.design. Thanks again for listening and hope to see you in our next episode.